Well, hello everybody and welcome to this session. I'm delighted to welcome Elena Wolfe. First time Elena has attended a British conference and also the first time therefore she's speaking at one. So we're especially delighted. Elena is a type alignment mentor and relationship coach. She holds a BA from the University of Texas from 2005 and has spent the last 8 years immersed in type theory and application. What a lovely place to be immersed. And the last 3 years helping clients to use type to find more energy, flow, and self-acceptance. And the title of this session is Fostering Group Belonging with Type-Informed Facilitation. And for me personally, I'm extremely interested because there's so much written and discussed these days about equality, diversity, inclusion. It really is, in the UK anyway, on the top of most organisations' agendas. And so belonging in a group can be encouraged with type inclusive language. A facilitator can hold people of different types together by creating space for a variety of cognitive functions and types. So Elena will discuss some inclusion principles with applied use examples from a case study. So I'm just going to spotlight you, Elena, for the recording.
All right.
Here we go, over to.
Okay, well, thank you for that very warm welcome, Catherine. It's really lovely to see everybody. I appreciate you all taking the time to choose my session to come live. And for anyone who's watching this later, I'm appreciative of you taking the time to watch this. I hope you take away some useful tools. I do have a slide deck, so I will go ahead and pop that on. Okay, and we are going to go slideshow. Play. Okay, can everybody see slide deck? Okay, and I am actually going to minimize all of your lovely faces. So Catherine, I'm just going to trust you to kind of keep an eye on the chat. And if anybody seems to be having questions, I'm going to be focused on the outline here so I can know what I'm supposed to be saying. All right, so the main thing that I want to add to Catherine's introduction is just that I have been working for about 2.5 years with a discussion group that started as a book club around The Magic Diamond, which is one of Dr. Dario Nardi's books, and it's his 8-function model of type. So that group is the bulk of my experience kind of running groups. It's one that I'll refer to a few times for specific examples as a bit of a case study. And our basic agenda is I want to cover some terminology, just since there's many different ways to talk about type. I want to be clear on what I'm sort of approaching it with, and then what makes a group successful, the leadership responsibilities and kind of underpinnings of getting a group going, and what the role of the group facilitator is. And then finally, we'll get to the meat of it, which is how can you actually kind of keep type in mind when you're running sessions, and what are some of the ways that looks like. So hopefully we can cover all of that in the time that we have. And here we go. So the conference theme this year is balance and belonging. And I find that type awareness really helps to create a sense of belonging for others when we're actively making space for their way of being, especially when that's one that they can tell we don't share. It feels like it's a way of saying, I see you, I can meet you where you are, I can invite you to be yourself with me. It's a way to make people feel safe. And being aware of our own type also helps us balance ourselves when we know I have a tendency to go too far in this direction. You can kind of consciously pull back, you cover more ground. It helps you make different decisions, or maybe better decisions. You might end up with the same decision, but you have more confidence in it, or you took a few things into account that you didn't. And so it's overall the same choice, but with more nuance or more just space for the other side of yourself, the other side of the situation. So different cognitive functions tend to look at different information. They have different goals. They see different things as relevant. And when you have a way of perceiving the world that tells you this is what's relevant, you're not going to see the same situation the same way that another person who has a different set of filters is going to see it. So you can literally have two people looking at the same situation and seeing different things. An example that I've used is throwing a dinner party with my friend who's an ENFJ, and I have INTJ preferences. So she's much more concerned with the social tone and making sure everyone has, you know, someone to talk to, that they're feeling comfortable. I might be more concerned with the practical things. You know, is there food on the table? Is, you know, if the trash bins are being filled up, are they being emptied? And she and I don't look at the situation the same way. Do I get mad at her for that? Or do I understand that she's operating in her zone of strengths and that I have different strengths, and that we can be stronger if we work together in kind of concert rather than conflict? So I just, in my personal life, in, you know, relationships, in, you know, work situations, in personal situations, understanding type really does help minimize conflict, because you can have grace for where the other person is, and also grace for yourself. So, you know, an example, to get a little more granular with it, if you have a thinking preference, you're probably going to be looking at, you know, the goal, what's the logical way to move toward it, what are the consequences, what are the measurable criteria. But your feeling function is going to be what tunes into your personal values and the emotional impact that it might have on yourself or someone else. If you consciously stop and consider that, take in a little bit more ground, then if you have feeling type preferences in your, well, feeling type people in your life, which obviously we're all going to, they're going to feel a little more considered. You have more empathy for them, and you're also not going to be fighting with the part of yourself that's saying, hey, this doesn't feel good to me, this feels immoral, or this feels like I'm gonna end up not liking the outcome. The same is going to be true for someone with a feeling preference toward their thinking side, and the same for sensing and intuiting preferences. So I'm using a lot of language here. This is a good point to stop and just clarify how I talk about type and what I think are or not what I think are, but what the relevant pieces of it are for my presentation today. So I will primarily be using the 4-letter type code dichotomies and the 8 Jungian cognitive functions. Our type preferences describe general patterns of function use. The dichotomies are what create our 4-letter code: introvert, extrovert, sensing, intuiting, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving. And our preference is going to be, it's a handedness. You know, we have a right hand, we have a left hand. We all use both. We might use one hand a little more often, but, you know, sometimes the other is actually the more appropriate tool. Thinking of playing a guitar, you know, you actually use your non-dominant hand for a lot of the fret work, and that's in some ways the more complicated side of playing, and yet that's the appropriate tool for that situation. So in terms of the letters, the S and TF relate directly to cognitive functions: sensing or intuiting, thinking or feeling. And then the introvert extrovert tells you whether your dominant function is an introverted or an extroverted function. And the J and the P tells you whether your first extroverted function is a judging function or a perceiving function. What do we mean, judging, perceiving? Perceiving, how you see the world, how you take in information. Judging is how you evaluate that information, what you do with that information. So if you separate each of those into introverted, extroverted versions, you end up with the 8 functions. So introverted sensing, extroverted sensing, introverted intuiting, extroverted intuiting, introverted thinking, extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, extroverted thinking. I will do my best to refer to all of them by the full name rather than saying SI, SE. That's, but if I slip, you know, just know that I'm doing my best. So I want to put up a little poll. Catherine, I think you have those. And I'm curious who all here has any experience with leading groups of any kind. And if you, oh, this is the type preference poll.
Yeah, have I got the right? This is the first poll.
Oh, did I say this was the first one?
Did you want the other one? I can do the other one.
Pull the other one up.
Okay, let me.
Yeah, sorry.
Bear with me.
No problem.
There we go. Oh yeah, leadership experience. That's the one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now it's not letting me launch it for some reason.
Okay.
You have to close the other one first.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to end it first, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I'll end it. So
Okay.
we didn't have results on that one, but that's okay.
Okay, it says it's ended, that first one. Shall I now try and launch the other one again?
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it's launched it this time.
Yeah. So I'm curious whether anyone here has specific types of leadership experience. For those not seeing the poll live, the options included classroom, work team, coaching, or discussion group, other and none. So I'm seeing a couple classroom and some work team leadership. And I think since it doesn't let us answer multiple questions, probably also discussion group coaching type situations are here. And that's just from what I know of some of the participants. So I will share the results very quickly and then stop sharing. Okay. So that gives us a little sense of some examples of what types of teams might be out there that we might have leadership opportunities with. So, okay. Here we go. So my specific experience, as I kind of brought up earlier, is in leading a discussion group. Our Magic Diamond Book Club in scare quotes, because while it did start as a book club, it really has progressed far beyond actually reading the text of the book. We finished that maybe a year in and then transitioned to just being an open discussion group. At that point, we did lose about a quarter of our membership that had been there specifically to work through the book, or life got busy again. We started during the pandemic, so there was also that kind of once social events and social lives started happening, there was harder to find the time to commit to regularly attending the group. As far as our active participants go, we have basically the entire suite of intuitive types represented. We have 2 INTJs, 1 INTP, 1 INFJ, 1 ENFJ, 1 INFP, 1 ENFP, 1 ENTP, and occasionally an ENTJ pops through. So it's clearly a space that we come to get our need for intuitive conversation met. It's also a place to nerd out about type. Most of us work with it professionally in one way or another. But I think also the fact that we have now 2.5 years of dialogue and community and relationships, we have a shared language and a shared culture, is also part of what keeps all of us coming back. So let's look at what makes a group successful. And in my opinion, it meets these 4 criteria. First, it achieves its intended goals or purpose. Second is it retains its members, and if applicable, adds and integrates new members. It meets regularly enough to maintain a sense of community and momentum on tangible projects. And the group ends or transforms when its purpose has been fulfilled or it's no longer serving its members. And I think that last point is one that's kind of worth emphasizing, because we all have a resistance to letting things end, but many parts of life have kind of a life cycle. They have a beginning, they have a flourishing, they have a sort of decaying, and then they have an end. And it's better to let something go gracefully than to hold on to it or to try and keep it alive when really there's not energy and you're forcing it. So I think that's part also of it's helpful to keep that in mind when you're evaluating, does this group need to keep going or change form perhaps? So I copied over the same list of example groups from the poll slide. You might have a classroom, a business team, a support group, a volunteer organization, discussion group, book club, academic society, social aid and pleasure club, or even a family might be a group that you're experiencing a leadership position in. And reasons for groups to exist. This is certainly not comprehensive, but you might have a traditional learning environment where you're really doing either explicit instruction or explicitly, covering the same materials with each other. You might have a more soft learning where it's discussion and dialogue rather than covering specific things. You might have hands-on practice and projects that you're doing. I'm thinking here in like a civic volunteer sense, you might be building or maintaining physical works in your community, like an art center, historical buildings, beautifying parks, making a community garden, that sort of thing. You might be needing to advocate for cultural or political change. You might be there to support academic or artistic exploration and work. You might be trying to offer assistance to either your local community or the global community. There's so many different reasons. The reasons that people individually join groups may or may not be the same reason that the group exists. And I mention this because groups are made of people, and the experience that people are having in a group is going to be what keeps them coming back. So if you as a facilitator or the anchor of a group want to keep it going, you also have to be aware of why people are coming in the first place. It's not just the reason the group exists, it's also what need is this fulfilling for the people who come. So any type can join a group for any reason, but I think there are some broad correlations. We have practical, ideological, and relational reasons that we might join things. And the practical reasons, I would say, roughly correlate with sensing and thinking goals. The group is a container or a catalyst for tangible action in the world. You might have a desire to build or create something or to change something. You have a need for a community or to be part of something. You feel responsible for showing up to your local community. Being involved in this group promotes your personal goals, whether that's directly, business networking or, long-term educational goals, or something a little less direct, but, you generally feel called to continue your education rather than shutting down. Okay. Those are, again, more or less sensing, thinking type of goals. They're tangible, they're practical, but any person might have those goals. It's not only sensors and thinkers who can have them. Similarly, ideological goals might correlate to intuiting and feeling functions. You're looking for a space where people really share your values, or being a member of that group aligns with your personal ethics. You're looking for a sense of purpose. You really believe in the cause or the individual behind the group. You really want to embody a certain value, like be the change you want to see, is, I think, a very good example of that. Or you're looking for inspiration, growth, learning. Again, those might be more correlated to intuiting and feeling functions, but anybody can have a need for that. And the relational reasons for joining groups are just our human needs. Everybody has a need for healthy mirroring, to be around other people with like minds, with like hearts. We need to feel like we belong somewhere. We need to have a sense of tribe. We need emotional support. Sometimes we need practical support that we can't get in another place in our life. We need to feel like our presence or absence in our community matters and makes a difference. So just to kind of pull this back to my Magic Diamond example, the tangible goal was to read through the book and discuss it. That's really specific. And obviously everyone who came wanted to do that, but there were other reasons that we had. some of us knew each other beforehand and we were really there for the friendship. And some of us were learning type and really thought this would be our way to understand that system much more deeply. Some of the group members were trying to clarify their best fit type. For me personally, starting it was looking to gain a professional skill with public speaking and group management. I just thought that was a really low stakes way to do it, so I could actually have the courage to do it. Dr. Nardi pops by sometimes because he likes to see how his work is really landing with end users, and he's gracious enough to answer our questions. So, they're all complementary, but they're not the same. And it's important to understand that. So we finally arrive at the underpinnings of what are the leadership roles and responsibilities for somebody who is anchoring a group. Again, the facilitator needs to understand the purpose and the goals for the group and its members. Why? So you can build guide rails to keep the group going. What's keeping it going? In existence, like the members keep showing up and on track, on purpose, moving toward what you're there to accomplish. So there's 3 types of tasks I see leaders as having: initiatory, administrative, and cultural. So initiatory tasks, it's literally getting it going. You create the space for the group. You show up first, you commit, you tell people this is happening. Obviously, you have to be clear on the goal of the group to form it in the first place. The administrative tasks, this is more making the meetings happen. You communicate about the meetings, you set reminders, or you designate someone to do that. You send out the follow-up communications, or you designate someone to do that. You keep an eye on the group as it goes over time. Are we staying on purpose? Are we actually meeting the purpose that we're here to serve? Just a quick note that delegation is part of leadership. You don't have to do everything, but you do have to make it clear whose responsibility it is. The cultural tasks are around creating the group that you want and making sure the group follows the culture that you're really hoping for it to have. So you want to set the tone for the culture, protect and promote the culture, monitor the culture, and then handle any relational tasks with group members. So the reason and this is something I want to emphasize, because groups of people will inevitably form cultures that are specific to that group. If you don't set behavioral expectations and communicate them either implicitly or explicitly, then a culture will emerge, and it may or may not be one that you like. It may or may not be one that's in alignment with your values or that really helps support the mission of your group. So in my opinion, establishing the culture that you want from the beginning is the best path to sort of creating the group you want. But if you haven't done that, you can always say explicitly, I would like to make some changes. I think these would be beneficial to helping us with, accomplish whatever we're here to accomplish, and, integrate that kind of explicit change with your group members. So setting the tone is creating the operating rules for the group. An example might be, is it okay to drop in and out of meetings? Do you need to be there the whole time? Do you need to be there on time? This is a preference. What is the nature of your group? With the Magic Diamond, I made the choice that I wanted people to come when they could be there, engage as much as they could. That was more beneficial to the whole than having only, there the whole time, only be there if you can be on time. Other groups might have a different preference. That was mine based on what our goal was, which was community and learning. Another example might be looking at whether your group is particularly hierarchical. Is there one person or maybe a structure of people that's clearly in charge, or is it more egalitarian and the leadership role is just creating guide rails to keep things going? Again, both valid. It's just, what do you want and what serves the purpose of your group better? And again, setting the tone might go so far as to include an explicit set of principles. This could be a classroom or workplace behavior policy. This might really be important if you don't know the group members in advance and aren't sure whether everyone's going to adhere to respectful dialogue around sensitive topics like race, gender, politics. that sort of thing. So the group leader is kind of the cultural anchor. You want to hold the energy and tone until it's internalized by group members as the expectation that they just sort of behave that way all the time. And you might need to guide people back toward it if they stray. That can be either just gently done in the moment, or it might be something where you have a private conversation with them afterward. Hey, I noticed that when we were talking about this topic, you had a few off-color remarks, and I just wanted to let you know that made me uncomfortable, or that made some of the group members uncomfortable. Can you try not to do that in the future? That sort of thing. You do need to embody the culture and the sort of rules that you're advocating. Our judging functions are the relevant ones here. Our judging functions drive our actions and choices. And this is a brief glimpse of some of the ways they might react to somebody who is not embodying their stated expectations for others. Extroverted feeling might really feel a trust betrayal. You're asking me to do something you're not doing. I can't trust you. Introverted feeling, I'm not going to listen to a hypocrite. Extroverted thinking is probably going to see it as a competency issue. You're so incompetent, you can't follow your own rules, so you're not worth listening to. Or you don't know these are, or you know that these are bad rules and you don't follow them. Why should I follow a bad rule either? Introverted thinking might be more a general principle. Rules should apply to everyone. So if it doesn't apply to you, why should it apply to me? And just quickly to cover the rest of this part before we move on to the exciting stuff. You want to monitor the culture over time, just sort of see how everyone's responding to it. Do they continue to respond positively? Are they thriving in that culture? Are they engaged? Are they showing up? Do they seem to want to be there? Do they seem to enjoy being there? And is the culture that you have allowing the goals of the group to be met? You can shift it if necessary. Maybe it needs to change form. Maybe it just got away from what you had intended and it needs to be brought back to center. And finally, the relational tasks is literally having relationships with group members. Part of leadership is being proactive. You want to check in before you see problems forming. Small problems are easier to solve and issues are easier to resolve like the first time or maybe the second time they come up, rather than when you have an entrenched pattern of letting it go 20 times and now there's an expectation that that's okay. So with groups, you might check in with group members directly. You also might invite feedback or even explicitly, ask for conversations about how the group is working for them, rather than waiting for people to come to you if there's a problem. That can be really intimidating for people to do, and not everyone is going to assume that a group leader is open to that kind of especially critical feedback. And so if you're actively soliciting that and actively making yourself seem safe to share that kind of critical or this could be working better type of feedback with, it's going to go a long way toward, again, helping make sure that the group is serving the needs of its members. So one point that I also felt worth making is that the different types will respond differently to an established culture. And I sort of found a couple different ways to look at it. There's attunement and obliviousness to what's going on in the group and with other people, and then adherence to sort of rebellion. And I feel like with the introverted sensing, extroverted feeling types especially, they're really going to be attuned to the expectations and what other people are doing. Some of the types, the thinking and introverted feeling, might be a little more oblivious because either the thinking just isn't looking at that information, it's not relevant, or introverted feeling is focused on its own experience, and the others are somewhere in the middle. And then when it comes to actually adhering to an established culture, the introverted sensing and the two extroverted judging functions extroverted feeling, extroverted thinking are going to want to show up in adherence with that culture. Extroverted intuiting and introverted feeling can really be rebellious toward it, wanting to break the mold, wanting to do their own thing, be authentic, be themselves, do something different. And again, the others are somewhere in the middle. So when it comes to making a group culture that has space for everyone, what does this look like? Well, you want to have enough rules and expectations that those who favor introverted sensing and the extroverted judging functions really know how to show up. They know how to, what to expect and how to present themselves in that space. You also want to have enough room for the extroverted perceiving types that really like to meet the world where it is and maneuver and innovate in the moment, as well as having this sort of individualistic freedom for introverted feeling. And for introverted thinking, introverted intuiting, the internal consistency of group culture, especially as it translates into actions, like, does it make sense? Does it move us toward the goal? Does it have any kind of significance, is going to be important. And this really just helps get everyone's buy-in on the group, on the culture, on taking actions. And it also is going to allow everyone to have a bit of space where they can feel like themselves. Those who really want to know what's expected of, what I can expect from the meeting, what is expected of me, have that. And those who really like to innovate and be improvisational know that they have space for that, and that all of it kind of makes sense. So the basic point is to create space for all types while holding the reason for the group to exist in the first place. And this, it's worth saying, it's going to look different for every group based on the size, the group members, the frequency of meetings, the reason the group exists, all of those things. There's no prescriptive formula. And your style as a facilitator might also come into play. Your type preferences matter here. Most extroverts in general, and then extroverted judging types, will generally find leadership easier. Introverts might have to stretch to be more assertive and expressive. Perceiving types might need to stretch to be more structured and decisive. Thinking types might need to be more sensitive to emotions and the sort of emotional tone of the people in the group. Feeling personalities might need to be more direct about how they speak and the being willing to commit to action steps or take action. So there might also be considerations beyond your personal type preferences. If you're part of a larger structure like a business or a school, you have external considerations. If there are tangible action steps that have to be taken, someone has to sort of be the last word to make a decision and then make that happen. And finally, are group members able and willing to follow your leadership style? So again, with our magic diamond example, I have INTJ type preferences. I'm an introvert and a dominant perceiving function, but I have auxiliary extroverted thinking, so I can take charge without a whole lot of stress if I need to. And I didn't want to lead, but I understood that somebody had to kind of make executive decisions for getting things going. So I took that role on and tried to take a hands-off approach as much as possible so that we could have a really egalitarian discussion group. And my group members stepped up to the opportunity. They didn't want to be led. They just wanted the space and the opportunity to have cohesive peer-to-peer contact. A different group of people might have responded differently. So again, there is no prescriptive form of group leadership that works for every situation, but there are some principles that can be used across many contexts. That brings us to running group sessions with type awareness. So this is where I wanted to do the second poll, what's your type? If we can't get it to run again, that's okay, because we're a small enough group in session that I can say we are 80% NTs and 20% NFJ. So NF in this particular session. And the basic tasks of leading a meeting or a group session as I see them. You want to greet the group and get everyone engaged, formally begin the meeting, orient everyone to the intention of the meeting, check in with the group members throughout in various ways, be prepared to explain or present new material in several ways, solicit feedback or participation, offer reflections for any feedback or responses you get, and then conclude the meeting. So when you are trying to make everyone feel welcome and glad to be there, it's good to have a variety of kind of catch-up questions that can engage different functions. Even if you don't know the type preferences of your group members, just, grab bag it, use a different style of question every time. So some feeling questions might look like, how are you? Or how do you feel today? Thinking question might look more like, how are things going? What have you been working on? Sensing questions might be, what's going on? What have you been up to? What have you been doing? And intuiting questions might be, what's new? What's been on your mind lately? So they're pretty similar questions, but they also are going to elicit slightly different responses and engage, different functions, different people. So one thing to consider as well is whether you want to have a set ritual to open meetings. You don't necessarily have to, but it can feel really comforting to the types who like that. And certainly is a good cue to say, this is when it's time to get serious and to transition out of that sort of soft opening. So a few type considerations to consider for conversations and also just meetings in general. Extroverts will generally be willing to jump right in. They're very conversational. They're either catching up, getting straight to business, but either way, they're in it from the beginning. Introverts tend to need a little more time to warm up to the space and the flow of the interactions. One thing that can happen here, especially if you have a very hands-off approach with your leadership, extroverts can sometimes take up all the airtime, and you don't want to cut them off, but you also want to actively create space for your less extroverted members. So maybe let the extroverts get the meeting going and get everyone warmed up to the space, and then start making space for your introverts and even pulling them in deliberately. So a couple different cues for that might be, let's hear from some different voices on this question, or even specifically calling out, Dario, what do you think about this? Where you call on someone specific, and that just prevents someone who is ready and willing to jump right in with an answer from doing so. So when you are kind of checking in or soliciting participation, again, asking different questions will get different functions to respond. So that might be either getting different people to respond or getting different parts of a person to respond. So if you have been hearing from the same people the whole time, you might, and especially if you know their type preferences, like, okay, well, it's been, my sensor thinkers who are answering everything. I'm going to deliberately ask a feeling oriented question or an intuiting oriented question this time to try and engage someone, some of the other group members. Or if somebody is in a space that's maybe non-productive, you can ask a question that's deliberately trying to get them into a different part of themselves. So if you have, say, an extroverted thinking type who's in full-on planning mode, and they're rolling ahead with trying to break down this project into the stages and how to make it work, you can interrupt that a little bit by asking them a question maybe that makes them pull back to the big picture. It's a little more of an abstract, intuiting question, or asking a feeling, values, emotion-based question. So here are a couple ideas for questions to engage different functions. For sensing, do you have experience with anything like this? How do you see this situation? What actions do you see to take? For intuiting, you might ask, what possibilities do you see? What connections or patterns can you make here? What is the deeper significance of this? For feeling, you might ask, how do you feel about this? Is that in alignment for you? Or where does this fit with your values? For thinking, you might ask, what do you think about this? Does that make sense to you? How would you approach this goal? So again, they might be fairly broad questions, but they're going to speak to different parts of ourselves. And when it comes to offering feedback, you also want to be sure that you have a variety of ways to offer feedback that are going to speak to different parts of this human psyche. The most obvious split for this one, I think, is the feeling thinking divide. There is a very strong difference in what those types of functions are looking for. Feeling functions tend to be looking for appreciation. Thinking functions tend to be looking for competency feedback. And so appreciating language is going to speak to gratitude, to participation, inclusion, sharing, connection. The trying is more important than the doing. So that might be something like, I'm so glad you chose to share that with me. Thank you for being so present to this meeting. I really appreciate the attention and attunement that you've given to this issue. That's going to be the sort of feedback that makes a feeler say, ooh, yes, okay, I'm appreciated. I feel seen. And for a thinker, on the other hand, they're really going to be looking for language about relevance, usefulness, performance, standards and expectations, clarity, that sort of thing. The doing is more important than the trying. So feedback for a thinker audience might be more, thank you for being so incisive with that comment, or that is such a helpful way to think about that, or that's exactly what I was looking for. Something that really speaks to the expectation and them having met or exceeded the expectation. So I also felt like it was worth pointing out with the cognitive functions overall that the specific functions have different feedback that they might be looking for. So if you know, for example, that you have somebody on the introverted feeling and extroverted thinking axis, are they looking more for feedback on the originality of their idea or contribution, the authenticity of it, or the usefulness of it? Is it that FI or introverted feeling, or is it that extroverted thinking? For extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, it might be more impact or inclusion versus accuracy and clarity. With introverted sensing, extroverted intuiting, precedent and protocol rather than innovation. Which one is going to be more important or feel more rewarding? With extroverted sensing and introverted intuiting, the tangible change versus the symbolic meaning. So these are just some ideas to keep in mind as you are responding to feedback. Just one final note on that. Sometimes relational needs come into it too. You might find that group members are maybe out of type preference in what they're there in the group to do. So for example, thinkers might sometimes need that tender, appreciative feeling language if they were being vulnerable and if they were actually letting the feeling part of themselves come out in that meeting or in that response. You might have intuitive thinkers that are used to feeling excluded and are really hungry for validation and connection. This is, I think, actually a big part of the NT experience in the Magic Diamond group. We have quite a few group members who don't have a lot of spaces in their life for that kind of dialogue and just sense of belonging. On the other hand, you might have sensor feelers in your group. You know, the stereotype is, oh, they're really looking to, you know, to feel connected and to vibe. No, they're here to get things done, and they want feedback on whether their ideas are useful or viable. So again, just kind of understanding both type and people's reasons for being there, understanding what part of them was leading the answer that they gave can really help you land the feedback with what they need to feel seen and appreciated. So as a couple sort of concluding thoughts, I really hope that this helped you understand how having a clearer sense of type can feel almost like a compassion training, right? Where you really see what's behind other people's reasons for being, and you can help them to feel understood. You can help them to feel safe. You can help them to feel wanted. And that's just a key part of the human experience. And if you're, you know, if somebody's choosing to be part of a group, they are on some level looking for some kind of belonging or sense of camaraderie or simpatico with the people that they're with. And so as a group leader, you can really choose to give them that experience, and it will serve your purposes too. It keeps them involved in the group. It keeps your group moving toward its goals. So yes, that is the end of my formal talk today. There's still a little bit of time for some Q&A. Just real quick, if anyone should want more information about my work, you can find me at thepatternbreaker.com. If anyone has a question or wants to reach out directly, my email is desk@thepatternbreaker.com. So I guess I'll stop share, and we can move to the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elena, for that. That's reminded me of loads of stuff that I probably have sort of forgotten over the years. That's been really helpful for me personally. But what questions or comments would you like to make for Elena?
Bring up the slide you did right near the end where you were looking at the function, attitude, opposite pairs. The first one was originality, usefulness.
Yeah, that was I guess the introverted feeling, extroverted thinking. Yeah, would you like me to put that slide back up?
Is there a way that we can have both things? Because I'd like to see everyone, but I'd like to hear what other people thought of those for their particular pairing.
Okay, yeah, and that is actually feedback that I would love to receive, because okay, so let's see, let me I'll share screen again.
Yeah,
And
find your slide. And I think, Catherine, if you have your computer on gallery view, and I'm not spotlighting Elena anymore, so I think you should be able to see the slide and us, if that's what you were hoping.
Yes.
Yeah, so then let me.
So the side by side. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, it's
okay. Yeah,
we tend to spotlight the speakers. It's just the way we do it. But yeah, is this the slide you meant, or did you mean that one with?
It is.
Oh, okay, great.
It is. That's the one I meant. And what was really interesting to me was I was in a relationship with someone with dominant extroverted thinking, and I had so many discussions where I kept trying to get to clarity, and he just didn't care. And I mean, it's not like he didn't care, but he just could not understand why that was such a crucial piece of information for me. And if I compare it to a partner who had introverted thinking in second position, in that case, at least we could understand each other around why it was important. But I then had to kind of push out, okay, what can we do to innovate to make sure that what we're clear on is actually, bringing us somewhere new and different. So it really, and the usefulness piece, I had also to do a bit of stretch to relate to that. And maybe just because I was an introvert, he was an extrovert, there was more stretch on my part and I'm also a woman,
Mm,
to try and get, okay, how can I get my needs met and bring something back around
yeah.
usefulness?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, thank you for sharing that experience, because it sounds, like obviously it was a little bit fraught. It sounds like it caused some tension points in your relationship. And I would actually say that um extroverted thinking, introverted thinking kind of, there's a tension there, and it basically just defines half of philosophy. The the Platonic sort of introverted thinking, almost idealism, or like what's the perfect system, versus the Aristotelian, but what actually applies, what's useful, what's here in the real world. And sometimes when you don't understand that you have different starting points, you can really get into some headbutting, right? Where it's like, and especially if the extroverted thinking doesn't take into account, okay, the usefulness of getting to clarity is that it satisfies my partner's needs, it makes this relationship more harmonious, it might lead to increased intimacy, and it will finally allow us to move this discussion forward into something actionable. If the extroverted thinking doesn't take that into account, or doesn't have that broad enough perspective of what's relevant, then it can be like, why are we doing this? This is wasting time. We could be getting so much done. And
I share that what Catherine said, I can resonate completely with, because I have that dominant introverted thinking need for clarity. And I annoy my husband often by saying, well, what do you mean by that? Because people use words, and I have a very precise use of words. I've got a quick comment if there's time. I don't want to hog the time. So one of the things I really liked that you said, Elena, was the point that the reason people join a group may not be the reason the group itself exists. And I think that's a really important point. And it's and we could have discussed that in all sorts of ways, but one thing it reminded me of was some years ago I worked on a high performance team program, and the first thing we did with the team was, what's the purpose of this team? This was in a utility company, so a wastewater company. And the first point was, the first discussion, the first workshop we would facilitate was, what's the purpose of this team? And you'd be amazed at how different people working in the same team on the same bit of the business, their different views of what the purpose of the team was.
Yeah, and that actually, well, first of all, thank you for that feedback. I'm glad that was so significant, because I feel like it was one of the themes that I hit several times, but to me it's a fundamentally important point. It's hard to productively move forward as a group if we're trying to move in 5 different directions, because we haven't stopped to establish from the beginning what we're all here for, and what we're each here for. And kind of take that all into account as we sort of decide how we're going to function, how we're going to make decisions. So
Dario, you're muted.
Is a bugbear. I mean, that's just the way Zoom is. It's all the time for me. I just wanted to say that the thank you, and the talk brought to mind so many different situations, not just the typical, like a small group or large group, the community, or the book club. I thought that what you mentioned for introverted feeling, so even though that's my third function, so hit right on with the FPs that I know, because it might be stereotyped as like, oh, what's our values, or are we moving in the right direction, or it has like a crusaderish aspect to it. But what I see with FPs is a desire, and I understand it myself, for personal expression. Like this is what I feel drawn to give or create in this group, or whatever it is. And then the other thing that really struck me, because I love that slide too, and I got the same one that Catherine asked for, and I got a snapshot of it, because the organization, I mean, the client that I've been working in the most the past couple of years, is the all of the leadership pretty much is NP types. And they've hired on a lot of SJs. So the support structure. And then there are individuals like me who are sort of in between. And there really is this constant tension all the time of the NP sort of like owners, managers, founders wanting, can't you put more on this? And what if it did this? And could we also have that? And of course that sort of drives the SJs crazy. And they keep paring back and simplifying and paring back and simplifying. Whereas what I do, and I'm thinking of somebody else on the team who's an ISTP, is that we're always looking for like the solution that satisfies the most number of requests in the most like usable or like functional way that could happen. And in many times I feel like what I do is just, fortunately, the one of the people I work with who's an ISTJ is mature enough that he's like, no, this is good, like that will work. But for the most part, I feel like with the SJ folks is just they ignore that because I'm looking for like the NI like solution to everyone's problem. And then there's just these like external, but no, we're just going to keep cutting away. It's stuff sort of blindly. And so I could see a lot of this, even though it didn't directly involve me and I'm not running any of the groups. I'm an independent consultant, but I can see all these dynamics in the organization between the innovation half and then the rules and procedures and wanting stuff standardized. And then, of course, when the leadership changes that, I could see that causes them agony because they draw diagrams of all of the procedures. I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like, can't you visualize those in your mind's eye? No, I mean, they want this because they go through in a very in-depth, like checking and understanding and following through. And I get it. So it's just fascinating to watch it as sort of like a larger level at how it plays out through like an organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that the presentation really kind of helped you tap into some of the meta patterns that you're seeing. And yes, there's a huge tension point between that need to innovate and that need to standardize. And one of the things with introverted sensing is it wants that through line across time. Like that's why we're looking at precedents. That's why we want this protocol in place. Sometimes you end up in a situation where it's a meaningless protocol. Like they put a protocol in place without necessarily understanding the actual significance of what was being done. And so that can be really frustrating for example, introverted intuiting, extroverted thinking, where it's like, but that's not a useful protocol. Like you missed the point, you missed the bigger principle or the deeper significance of why we were doing that. And so now we're baking in this like pointless ritual that doesn't actually add anything. It just is needlessly, complicating the training or whatever. But then on the other hand, the kind of constant like, oh, let's change this, let's try this, let's experiment with this, let's improvise. With extroverted intuiting, it might be very stimulating and exciting for that function, but it's very difficult for anybody in operations to actually function and work with that. How do you tell clients, oh, well, the protocol that applied last week has changed? Like you can't, like that's not
No,
it's not a way to move things forward. Again, it's the TE kind of judgment coming in. This isn't useful. This doesn't let us get things done.
Fortunately, I have enough compatriots, fellow introvert and thinking preferences that we do have very much our hats on for like, how can we solve these problems? And not be like, no, it has to be this way. But it's it's amusing. And actually the whole organization went through a type training recently. But it was just letter preferences, so it ignored type development. Which it really reminded me how important it is, even if people don't talk about the 8 functions, to talk about the 3rd function or some equivalent way of doing it, because otherwise people change. They're like, oh, I changed type from last time. And I'm like, no, you've just adapted to the culture of the organization. And that happens to be your 3rd function. And now you think you're a feeling type, even though you're not. It's just a reminder of the of all of that as well. I mean, how people adapt to the organizational culture and
Yeah.
I think it could be really interesting to ask people to consider how they might move along the dichotomies. So how do you move between originality and usefulness in like the polarity thinking that Sterling was talking about in his keynote? Because I can certainly see pieces, and this is what I like about the 8 things you've chosen, is there does feel like there is a flow that's fairly natural between them.
Yeah.
So again, thank you for spurring a lot of thinking.
Yeah, well, and thank you for calling that out, because when I was thinking about how to kind of present the more function specific feedback, I deliberately chose to put it along the function pairs, because if you're using one part of a pair, you're using the other part. It's just how much are you consciously accounting for both? But you can't, if you have extroverted thinking as one of your dominant functions, that means you have introverted feeling in there too. If you have that beautiful introverted thinking and your need for clarity, you also have that extroverted feeling need, like what's the emotional impact, and so just being able to sort of discern, okay, which one of these am I looking for feedback on, or do I need feedback for both, can be really helpful. And also, if you know that if you see one person responding like to usefulness language, like, oh, okay, I bet I can also compliment them on like their sort of personal contribution, their authentic human experience, and that will also feel good for them, even if they're not sure why.
Thank you, Elena. Unless
yeah.
there's any more burning questions, we're after the hour. So thank you for doing this session for us.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting, and as I said, reminded me of lots of stuff that I need to pay more attention to. I'm going to stop the recording now, so we'll give you a little clap.